I've always loved the outdoors, so when my friends invited me to go camping with them, I jumped at the chance. We packed up our gear and set off for a remote campsite deep in the woods. The first day was great. We hiked, fished, and enjoyed each other's company. As night fell, we built a fire and cooked up some dinner. But as the night went on, things started to get weird. I had just gotten settled into my sleeping bag when I heard something moving around outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds were too deliberate. I heard footsteps crunching on the leaves and twigs, and then the sound of something scratching at the tent. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard a low growling sound coming from outside. It sounded like it was getting closer and closer to the tent. I held my breath, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. The growling turned into snarling, and I could hear something clawing at the fabric of the tent. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do. Should I wake up my friends and tell them what was happening? Should I try to fight whatever was outside the tent? I didn't have much time to decide, because suddenly the tent collapsed inward, and I was face to face with a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. It was tall, covered in matted fur, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It snarled at me, saliva dripping from its jaws. I screamed and scrambled backwards, trying to get away, but it was too fast. It lunged at me, and I felt its claws tear through my skin. I woke up in the hospital a few days later, surrounded by my friends. They told me that they had heard me screaming and found me outside the collapsed tent, covered in blood. They didn't see what had attacked me, but they found huge claw marks all around the campsite. I don't know what it was that attacked me that night. Maybe it was a bear, or a mountain lion, or something else entirely. But I know that I'll never forget the feeling of pure terror that washed over me as I lay there in my sleeping bag, waiting for the monster to come and get me. As I lay there in the hospital bed, my mind kept replaying the terrifying events of that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature that attacked me wasn't just some wild animal, but something much more sinister. My friends tried to reassure me that it was just a freak encounter with a bear, but I knew deep down that it was something else entirely. I couldn't bring myself to go camping again after that experience, and I became obsessed with finding out what had attacked me. I spent countless hours researching cryptids and monsters that lived in the woods, trying to find any clue that might help me understand what had happened that night. The more I dug, the more I realized that there were countless stories of people encountering terrifying creatures in the wilderness, creatures that defied all explanation. One night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard a scratching sound coming from outside my window. I got up to investigate and saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me from the darkness. My heart pounding in my chest, I realized that the creature that had attacked me in the woods was back. I tried to run, but it was too late. The creature burst through the window, its claws slashing at my flesh. I screamed for help, but no one came. I was alone, at the mercy of this monstrous beast. As the creature dragged me out of the house and into the woods, I knew that I was going to die. There was no escape from this thing, no hope for survival. All I could do was pray that it would be quick. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body covered in cuts and bruises. I knew that I had narrowly escaped death, but I also knew that the creature was still out there, waiting for its next victim. From that day on, I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering when the creature would come back for me. I never went camping again, never ventured into the woods alone. I knew that I would never be safe again. Months had passed since the terrifying attack that left me scarred both physically and mentally. I had tried my best to move on and put the experience behind me, but it was always there, lingering in the back of my mind like a nightmare that refused to fade. One day, I received a call from one of my friends. They said that they had left some of their camping gear at the same campsite where we had been attacked. They asked if I would be willing to go back with them to retrieve it. At first, I hesitated. The thought of returning to that place filled me with dread, but eventually, I agreed. As we made our way deep into the woods, I felt a sense of unease creeping over me. The forest seemed darker, more foreboding than I remembered. Every sound made me jump, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows. When we finally arrived at the campsite, my heart sank. It was just as we had left it, with our destroyed tent still lying in a heap on the ground. As my friends began gathering their gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting to strike. And then, I heard it. The low growling sound that I had heard on the night of the attack. It was coming from the woods, and it was getting closer. My friends didn't seem to hear it, but I knew that it was real. The creature was back. I tried to warn my friends, but it was too late. The creature burst out of the trees, its eyes glowing with a feral intensity. It was bigger than I remembered, more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. We tried to run, but it was too fast, too strong. It was like it was playing with us, toying with us, before delivering the final blow. I thought I was going to die, just like I had before. But then, something miraculous happened. Another creature, just like the one attacking us, appeared out of nowhere and started fighting with it. They clashed in a ferocious battle, clawing and biting at each other. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. In the chaos, my friends and I were able to escape. We ran as fast as we could, not daring to look back. When we finally made it back to civilization, we were shaken, traumatized by what we had just witnessed. I don't know what those creatures were, or why they were fighting, but I know one thing for sure. I will never go back into those woods again, and I will never forget the horror that I experienced on that fateful day. As we ran for our lives from the battling creatures, I couldn't help but think that this whole situation was ridiculous. Here we were, a group of grown adults, being chased by monsters in the woods. It was like a cheesy horror movie come to life. As we stumbled through the underbrush, my friend Dave tripped and fell, tumbling head over heels down a steep embankment. We all stopped and turned to help him, but before we could, we heard a blood-curdling scream from below. Guys, I found a cave. I'm going in. We groaned in unison. Dave, you idiot. Get back up here. But he was already disappearing into the darkness of the cave, leaving us no choice but to follow. Inside, the cave was pitch black, with only the dim light from our cell phones to guide us. We could hear the sounds of the battle outside, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. And then, just when things couldn't get any worse, we heard a new sound. A rumbling, growling noise that seemed to be coming from the cave itself. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests, as a giant grizzly bear emerged from the shadows. It was the last thing we expected to see, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring dumbly at the massive animal. And then, without warning, Dave stepped forward and started talking to it. Hey there, big guy. What's your name? You look like a Ralph to me. We all stared at him in disbelief. Dave, what are you doing? That thing could kill us. But to our surprise, the bear seemed to be responding to Dave's strange brand of humor. It snorted and shook its head, almost like it was laughing. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it lumbered off into the darkness. We all stood there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. And then, slowly but surely, we started to laugh. We laughed until our sides hurt, until the fear and tension of the last few hours had melted away. In the end, we never did find out what those creatures were, or why they were fighting. But we did learn something important about ourselves. That even in the face of overwhelming danger, we could still find humor and joy in the strangest of situations. As we walked out of the cave, relieved to have avoided the clutches of the monstrous creatures, we realized that we were lost. Completely and utterly lost. Dave, who was still in his comedic element, suggested that we use the stars to navigate our way out of the forest. He tried to sound knowledgeable, pointing out Orion's belt and the North Star, but none of us had any idea what he was talking about. It was like listening to a stand-up comedian doing a routine about astrophysics. Okay, he said, finally giving up. I have a better idea. Let's just follow the sound of the river. That's gotta lead us somewhere, right? So we set off, following the sound of the rushing water. It seemed like a good plan, until we realized that the river was getting louder and louder, and that we were heading straight towards a raging waterfall. We skidded to a halt just in time, our hearts pounding in our chests. Dave, ever the comedian, tried to make a joke. Well, guys, I guess that's the end of our camping trip. Looks like we'll be going out with a bang. But none of us laughed. We were all too scared and disoriented to appreciate his humor. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard a rustling in the bushes. And then, out of nowhere, a troop of Boy Scouts appeared. They were all dressed in identical uniforms, with their badges and sashes jangling as they moved. They looked like they had just stepped out of a time machine from the 1950s. Hey, guys, said the scout leader, a balding man with a bushy mustache. What are you doing out here? Did you get lost? We tried to explain our situation, but it was hard to make coherent sentences while we were being stared at by a group of preteen boys in matching outfits. Well, don't worry, said the scout leader. We'll help you find your way out. Just follow us. So we trudged along behind the Boy Scouts, feeling ridiculous but grateful for their help. It was like being in some sort of bizarre comedy skit. And in the end, we did make it out of the woods, thanks to the help of those intrepid scouts. We never did find out what those creatures were, or why they were fighting. But we did learn that sometimes, the best way to deal with a scary situation is to find the humor in it. As we followed the Boy Scouts out of the woods, a sense of relief washed over us. We were going to make it out alive. But just as we stepped out of the tree line, we heard a low growling sound behind us. We turned around, and our hearts froze in our chests. The creatures we thought we had escaped were standing before us, snarling and drooling. They had followed us out of the woods. We were trapped. We had nowhere to run. One of the creatures lunged forward, its sharp claws reaching out for us. But before it could get close, a blinding light filled the clearing. It was the search and rescue team. They had been looking for us for hours, and they had finally found us. But as the light shone down on us, we realized something was wrong. The creatures weren't just creatures. They were people. Humans, twisted and deformed by some unknown force. The search and rescue team tried to subdue them, but it was too late. They had already gone mad with rage, attacking anyone in their path. In the chaos, I turned to run, but one of the creatures grabbed me by the leg. I fell to the ground, and as it reached down to finish me off, I saw its face. It was the face of my best friend Dave. He had been turned into one of them. I screamed in horror as the creature lunged at me. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The search and rescue team had managed to save us, but barely. We had been attacked by a cult, who had been performing dark rituals in the woods. They had turned our friends into monsters, and tried to sacrifice us to their dark gods. I never went camping again after that. The memory of what happened in those woods still haunts me to this day.